get going and I'll introduce you. So today we are riding day 7. So we're still on day 7 of our Thailand 8-day ride. Again, it's a beautiful day. It's one of our favorite days on the bike because the scenery is just spectacular. So enjoy the scenery as that starts to play shortly. But today we've got Scotty back on, and we're joined by Travis Auld, who he is, amongst other things, the CFO of AFL. As you all know, and it's been in the news, and it's been a tough time for those guys just trying to navigate what the game looks like during COVID, and certainly those challenges continue. So we are so appreciative of your time, Travis, given just what's going on at the moment. So I'm going to hand it straight over to you and Scotty to have a chat.
Thanks, CT, and welcome, Travis.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me. I think I just dropped out for a moment there, but I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you just fine. Thanks.
Fantastic.
So I guess I want to start, your role is pretty interesting and pretty all-encompassing as well. And we'll have some AFL supporters, but we might have some people that aren't as familiar with AFL. Can you tell them a little bit about your role? Because it's kind of an unusual role as well.
Yeah, Scott. So, hi, everyone. I feel a little guilty. You're out on the outside or inside riding your bikes, and I'm sitting in my lounge room. So I'm a little guilty, and I'm feeling a little envious at the moment. I'd like to get on my indoor trainer. It's just sitting over there. I'm staring at it. So after this, I better find some time to jump on it. But well done, and congratulations, incredible cause, and full credit to you. So I've worked almost my entire career in the AFL. Was never the plan. At the moment, I find myself at the AFL head office. I've been head office just over 5, maybe close to 6 years now. And my role sits across a few areas. So I'm responsible for finance. This is probably the easiest part of my role to understand. The finance of the competition. The competition has revenue of about $1 billion between us and the clubs. The AFL itself is about half of that. We have about 700 staff around the country. Unfortunately, at the moment, about 75% of those are on stand down as we're going through this difficult period. So we're hoping to turn that around pretty quickly and get a lot of those staff back. So I've got finance. I run broadcasting, and so we've got broadcast relationships with Seven and Tel and Telstra. So I spend a lot of my time sort of day-to-day working with those guys to make sure we're delivering the product to them that they can put on your television screens and hopefully lots of people watch. I run the club relationship, so the club portfolio. So I spend a lot of time dealing with the 18 club CEOs, which I sort of relate to like having 18 kids. Some are well behaved. That's it. That's exactly right. Some are naughty, some are well behaved, some do well at school, some don't. And so a big part of my role and one of my KPIs, I suppose, is trying to get those guys, navigate those guys through their issues and opportunities before they have to get to my CEO on my board. Because if they get that far, then I haven't done my job. And so that's a big part of my role. And I joke about it, but I do love that part of my role. I spent most of my career working in the AFL club environment. And so I do love the cut and thrust of the club piece. And so club strategy is a big part of my role. And that's how much money we give each club. And then the accountabilities that come with that, but then also how do we support them strategically in terms of their growth strategies. So that's my broad.
Great. Yeah, and before you started, because you didn't grow up in Melbourne, you grew up more in the bush, didn't you?
I did. I grew up in this would be a test for people. I grew up in a place called Tatura. Tatura is 3,500 people near Shepparton in the Golden Valley. It's about close to sort of 2 hours north. To the due north of Melbourne. And so I did grow up in a football zone though, so I certainly grew up playing football and winter and cricket in summer. And not a lot of cycling in the bush, so I didn't get into cycling until sometime after that. But no, I grew up with a football background, yeah.
And so did you, when you were a kid growing up, did you different kids have different aspirations of what they want to do when they grow up. Some want to be a footy player or some want to be fireman or something like that. Was AFL something when you were a kid going, oh, I want a career in the AFL? Was that even on the horizon or not really?
No, it wasn't. I mean, like most kids, if you go right back, you probably had dreams and aspirations to play AFL at that level one day, but I was a long way away from that. And even as I went through university, I did a Bachelor of Business, and I didn't have any aspirations to work in AFL, the AFL corporate environment or admin environment at that stage. I became a chartered accountant. Was very happy doing that. Very fortunate. I got sent to London for 6 months on a secondment. I was doing okay, and then two of my clients were AFL clubs, and one of them was the Essendon Football Club. And so working with them in a professional capacity, they then headhunted me across to come and work for them. And so I just sort of fell into AFL. A lot of people talked about wanting to join the AFL environment. It's quite difficult. There's not a lot of roles. It's quite a small employee base compared to other careers. And so I was sort of lucky I fell into it and have been there ever since.
Now, when you were a kid, who did you barrack for?
I grew up barracking for Richmond.
All right.
Yeah, and so my grandmother was a Richmond supporter, and so she wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah.
What happened over that time was, as I sort of got into my teenage years, Richmond wasn't much good for a long time. You probably don't remember that now for those that follow footy, because they've been really good for the last 4 or 5 years. But there was a long period there they were no good. And then I worked for Essendon for 11 years. And so I became an Essendon supporter. Then I went up to the Gold Coast for 5 or 6 years. And so I'm a bit confused now. I sort of barrack for things like crowds and broadcast ratings.
Yeah, that's right. It changed a little bit. It's interesting because you can tell I have a bit of an accent. I've been in Australia 25 years, grew up in America. And one of the guys that picked me up, I was hitchhiking from Canberra to the Snowies 25 years ago. And this guy picked me up because he just wanted some company. And I used to be an adventure guide, and he was an adventure guide, going to a whitewater kayaking weekend for only guides. And we struck it up, and they said, I got an extra kayak if you want. And he taught me about AFL on that ride. And he's still, to this day, one of my closest mates, 25 years later. And he's a diehard Richmond fan. So that's he's kind of brainwashed me from the beginning, which is always interesting. And I think that's what I noticed as well. Melbourne and Victoria really have that strong club loyalty that you don't really find in other states. And I think it was interesting because one of your first kind of greenfields role was to start up the AFL team in the Gold Coast. Tell us a little bit about that experience, because the Gold Coast has had patchy history of any professional sporting club team. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, my first role in AFL was at the Essendon Football Club, a big football club, really successful. We didn't miss the finals very often. In fact, they won a premiership during that time. You weren't trying to grow the game. You weren't trying to sell the game. Everyone knew AFL in Melbourne. And so I got given the opportunity to head up there as the first CEO. So when I arrived on the Gold Coast, there wasn't a team, there wasn't a brand. They weren't called the Gold Coast Suns. They didn't have a uniform. They didn't have a home base. They literally didn't have anything. And so you talk about starting with a blank canvas. Right. This is as blank as a canvas can be. And even more than that, there'd been a number of sporting clubs who have started on the Gold Coast and been unsuccessful in doing so. And so there was some, not hesitation, but there was a fairly sort of well-grounded awareness of what was going to take to build a club. And so the big, I suppose the first thing for me was a football team, a successful AFL team was never going to be enough on its own on the Gold Coast. It needed to be more than that, because not enough people love the game. I mean, people live there. There's a lot of Southerners who moved up, but they weren't looking for their football. They're there because it's great weather, really good environment. You're competing with the beaches. You're not competing with other football teams and theme parks and the like. And so we had to create a product that stood for more than just this on-field piece. We had to create something that was what you just talked about, Scott, was this sense of belonging and pride in the team. And so to do that, we had to connect the team to the community. So the first thing we did is said, okay, how do we build a brand that is relatable to the Gold Coast, and of which the Gold Coast people, whether you like footy or not, you're really proud. You're really proud of this team because they represent you. Hence, if you sort of fast forward now, you've got a team called the Suns. You've got the sort of livery looks a bit like the sun and the sand and the ocean. So trying to pick up all those pieces. We set out that we would do double the number of community hours that other teams were doing in the more traditional states. And so if they did a couple of thousand hours a year, we were going to do 4,000 or 5,000 hours a year of giving to the community than we wanted back. And so this real deliberate strategy. And we also knew it was going to take some time. Everyone wants instant success. We felt like if we took some shortcuts and brought in a whole lot of older players who would have delivered a lot more success, probably not ultimate success, but more competitiveness, would have felt better, would have certainly been easier to lead in that environment, but they wouldn't have been able to ultimately connect with the Gold Coast. And so it was a wonderful experience for me. I think the rawness of the experience from a leadership point of view meant I learned a lot about myself, good and bad. Certainly was a great opportunity to grow as a leader. And it's a period of my career that I won't forget.
Yeah, and I guess those opportunities really to start a professional team up don't come around very often. And not just in AFL, I reckon in any sport. So that's a pretty massive cap to have, which is pretty impressive. And so what brought you then to the AFL, to overseeing the AFL?
So I've been at the Gold Coast almost 6 years, 5.5 years, I think, of which 3.5 years, almost 4 years, I were in the competition. So I was there for 18 months before we entered the competition. Our current AFL CEO, Gillon McLachlan, had been given the CEO role, and he approached me when he got the role to say he wanted me to come on board to run the club portfolio. For him, it was a new role, probably a role that he'd filled at the 2IC to Andrew Demetrio, which was sort of largely working with the clubs, and he felt he needed someone to do that similar role. It took me some time to make my mind up. I felt like I hadn't quite done what I wanted to do on the Gold Coast. It's still a very young club, and so it took some convincing, but eventually made the decision to come across and join that. And then, part of my role then is to continue to work with that club and other clubs through, so I've maintained that close contact, and obviously I've got a real interest in the club.
Wow. And I'd imagine the role is quite complex, especially the broadcasting rights. That's the big negotiation with the networks and all that. Plus, as you said, you've got all of the CEOs of all the clubs that have their own mandate, and then they're trying to fit in within the AFL framework as well.
Yeah, I think
and then the other piece that's in there is the... Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I missed that last piece. The other piece?
Yeah, and the other piece is really about the women's AFL, which is kind of the last couple of years, it's just gone from strength to strength.
Yeah. So I think the thing you notice most, or I notice most anyway, and a lot of people do as you move into the AFL environment in terms of the headquarters, is the number of stakeholders. Stakeholder management is huge. And when you make a decision or you decide to go in a certain direction, you've got to then engage a whole group of stakeholders to bring them with you. Now that happens I know for those that are listening, it happens in every environment. It's just that we are an organisation of huge interest, and a lot of people have some level of engagement, and you want that engagement in the decisions that you make. And so I'll give you an example. Yesterday, we released the next round of our fixture. We're doing it differently this year. Because of COVID and releasing fixtures in batches. It takes about a day to get to everyone to have those conversations about here's what the fixture looks like, here's what the impacts are for you. So that might be broadcasters. At one end, it might be clubs, it might be the Players Association, it might be venues. There's a whole range of people when you make one pretty simple decision that need to understand where you're going. So stakeholder management is a big part of my role. I would spend a lot of time on the telephone, making sure people understand why we're going in a certain direction and where we're going. For me, broadcasters are probably my biggest stakeholder. 50% of the industry's revenue, more than 50% of the industry's revenue comes from broadcasting. So they have a big stake in our game. They're the number one medium to get to our fans. And so I spend a lot of time on the phone to Channel 7 and Foxtel in particular, working through that. that world is complex. You've got the fragmentation of media at the moment, and the immediacy that happens with media, that it's changing. The way people are consuming our game is changing. I still think now and into the sort of near future, I think we're still free-to-air is really important, and Foxtel as a subscriber platform is really important, but at some stage that's going to change. I don't know when, and that's the trick to all this. But trying to look ahead, look at happening, continually keep an eye on what's going on around the world. And certainly, when we could, we used to get over to the States and have a look at some of the things they're doing to try and learn and grow our game. So that's a big part of it. I think it is complex, but I find it really interesting and challenging, the broadcast part. You asked about AFLW. AFLW is a really interesting story. Women's football has been going for a long time, under the radar, and there's pioneers of women's football that deserve a lot more credit than they've been given. We didn't invent women's football. We just took advantage of, or was able to assist and support people who've done the work for a long, long time. I remember sitting around a boardroom table with my executive and CEO, and we came up with a plan where we thought that we should introduce an elite women's competition. And we wanted, with 3 years, I think we said we want 3 years to get ourselves prepared. And our CEO, and he likes to push things, and he's a wonderful leader and quite entrepreneurial, and he loves this idea of growth. So he said, okay, good, let me have a think about that. He went out the next day and announced to the public that we're going to have an AFLW competition in 2 years. He decided he's going to take a year off it. And he thought the best way to make sure we hit that target was just to tell everyone. So if everyone knew, there was no resiling from that. And so we all looked at each other and thought, okay, we've now got 2 years to implement a 3-year plan. And as is in life, you tend to get there.
Yeah.
I think one of the things certainly I've learned over the last 2 or 3 months is we've implemented things over the last 2 or 3 months that we've been trying to implement for 3 years. And we haven't because there's a lot of barriers and it's hard and people can't do it. But when you have no choice, you can do a lot of things. And so we've restructured a lot of things with our clubs in the last few months, that I hope that we continue that nimbleness and openness to change that we've had to embrace over the last 3 months. Just to close out the AFLW piece, one thing we want to be really clear about, we had a board meeting 2 days ago, was while we'll need to resize our business, I'm loving these visuals, by the way, on the left-hand side there.
Yeah.
While we're resizing our business because our revenues have taken a hit and probably will for a couple of years, we need to protect our investment in AFLW and in women's football more generally, from young girls all the way through to the elite. And so I was really pleased that our commission supported that, and we came out with an announcement to say that we won't be compromising anything within our AFLW programs in terms of cost cutting into the foreseeable future.
Right. Which is pretty massive, because it's interesting. I've got 3 kids, so I've got two girls and a son. And my middle daughter is extremely sporty. And she wants to play professional soccer or football overseas. But she loves AFL as well. And it's interesting because we have these great discussions about and why is it taking so long for women's football? And I'm going, well, there's the financial piece, then there's the fan piece, then there's the broadcast piece, and you really would be juggling so many different components to make that work and make that happen. And I also see that you guys announced that you have announced the season as well for the women's AFL.
Yeah, that's right. So our season has traditionally been at the start of the year before the men's. We're hoping to continue that next year, subject to whatever the environment looks like, but certainly that's our plan to do that. I think one of the great things of working in this industry for me is the ability to see the impact of your decisions that you make, and so to walk down the park now and see young girls kicking the footy around with their parents or with their brother, and enjoying the game like I have been able to, and then to see those girls have their own role models to look up to, and their names on their backs and numbers on their backs is something that's really inspiring. And I've got kids, and to then to have that choice, regardless of what choice they want to make, to have the choice and the opportunity is fantastic.
Yeah, it's a much different world we live in now compared to when I grew up. That's for sure. And I want to go back to, because you mentioned how COVID has really forced many people in business and in sport to get a bit more creative, to look at things a little bit differently. But I'd imagine the pressure that you would have been under, like the media was hounding, like, look at what happened with Rugby Australia. Look at what's going on with cricket. At the top, there's been all of this scrutiny. There's been people that have resigned. What do you do to try and keep yourself kind of balanced? Because I'd imagine the stress would be quite a big toll.
That's assuming I'm balanced. I think it's a really good question. I think I've learned some more about myself in the last few months, perhaps. So for me, I'm more than I actually realised relying on structure and habits. And so the big thing for me, from a stress point of view, from a mental stress point of view, is I need physical exercise. I have to do a form of physical exercise. I like to feel healthy, and I love cycling, for example, where I like to cycle with my mates because it's a way of that bit of that fun and banter, but that social connection. But equally importantly, doing something physical is really good for me mentally. And so I knew that going into COVID. What I probably didn't realise as much as I do now is the impact of losing structure in your life. And so I had structure in my life where I knew I could get up, I would do some form of exercise, I'd eat well, I'd sleep well. I had a few sort of key pillars in my life that were really important to me, and I had some of them taken away early on. I certainly had the physical exercise bit taken away just through the sheer volume of work, and then some of the restrictions didn't allow us to ride together as groups, and so that went away. The sleep part went away because we sort of had a lot to do in a short period of time, and so I wasn't getting the sleep that I would normally get. And so to be honest, after a few weeks, I sort of fell over a little. I stumbled and thought, hey, I'm not feeling as good as I should be feeling. I need to get back some of that structure, and I need to prioritise that, because even though I feel like I've got to be working all the time, I'm not going to be the best version of me unless I bring some of that structure back into my life. And so I quickly worked out I have to find other forms of exercise within those restrictions. I've got to get some time for me within this thing. And so a big part of it for me was just to bring that structure, and there's good habits of eating well, sleeping, and exercising. And so I feel like now, for example, I have my little trainer set up in the corner. If at worst I can get on it for 20 minutes, 30 minutes on Zwift, and get some exercise, I feel better for it. The big long 120k rides just have to be parked for a while. But I've got some other form. And so I think what you learn, sort of waffling a bit, I think what I learned through this process is compromise. That it doesn't have to be exactly in the previous format that you had it. You can find lots of ways to do the same thing. I think one of the other complexities during this period is this is hard for everyone. This is not an AFL issue. It's not a sport issue. This is not even an Australian issue. This is a global pandemic. And so other people you talk to, they're all going through their own struggles. Whereas in other situations, if I'm going through a really difficult period in my life or in a work sense, I'll generally reach out to a mate or family who's not going through such a difficult time, and then I can live off their energy a bit and get me back on board. At the moment, one of the challenges we're all, largely either someone we're doing it tough ourselves or someone around us is, and so just being aware of that and making sure you're really mindful of your own needs during this period. I don't know if that answers your question, but I have reflected on that question a couple of times myself.
No, that's great, because I think that, if you think about it, nobody expected it. And the impact that it's had on people is pretty much across the board. A lot of people had to work, a lot of sleepless nights for lots of different people. I usually spend most of my time on a plane flying around the world, doing conferences and training and consulting and coaching. And I haven't been on a plane in 3 months, which is weird, but nice at the same time. So, and I think there are some gems that you shared about finding the time. And I like one thing that you said as well. It doesn't mean you have to do it for you've got to wait for that 4-hour window that you have. Grab 20 minutes here, grab 15 minutes there, and use the time and kind of stack it in, which is brilliant. I also, again, I was doing some research on you, not quite stalking you. I kind of talked to a couple of friends that I know that know you as well, and they said you are an absolute mad cyclist. That you're a mad, keen cyclist. You love to go. You push hard, which is great. But they also told me to ask you about the Hell Ride. Can you tell us a little bit about what that? Because when they said that, it kind of picked me up a little bit. So what's this Hell Ride all about?
There may be some people listening who from Melbourne who understand the Hell Ride. So my nature is, and I don't always love myself for this, but I'm quite competitive. So if I'm going to do something, I like to put myself in a bit of a zone. And so if I'm going to go for a run, then I might as well do a marathon. If I'm going to do a ride, I might as well see it, try and hang in there. So, and I'm too old for this, but I do it. And so there's a ride each Saturday called the Hell Ride in Melbourne. The total ride from my house is about, I don't know, 95, 100 Ks. The actual Hell Ride itself is about 65, 70 Ks. But they will sit on 50 Ks an hour for a lot of it. And it's a sort of a bit of a war of attrition. So you get a lot of the NRS riders on there that sit on the front. Every now and again, you get some of the pros in training that sit on the front. It's got a bit of reputation because there can be 150 riders in the bunch.
Right. Wow.
And it's every man for themselves, and it gets a little sketchy at times. I've seen a few people sort of come off, and you got to try and make it around. There's this out and back loop, and if you get dropped off, you get dropped off. And so I used to love. It's not happening at the moment, but I used to love doing the Hell Ride, and it was an incredible challenge. But the exhilaration of sort of doing those rides is something that I used to look forward to on a weekend, and we'd have a bunch of mates and we'd go and do it and try and get through to the end of it.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like, every person for themselves, which is sometimes a bit of fun. And I guess that's what we have really in the hands community. We've got some people that are kind of the elite athletes, that are the massive cyclists, they go hard. And then we've got other people that, they don't get on a bike except for once or twice a year, which is kind of an interesting spread across the group. I know when we were starting to think about this hands virtual ride, I actually was quite excited for it because I used to do a lot of cycling from a young age, did a lot of trips and stuff like that. Used to lead trips in Vietnam and everything else on bikes, but kind of got out of it as you get a little bit older. And I've actually enjoyed it. I think, and one thing that you said earlier as well, the structure, just having a bit of that structure that's your time, every morning. And again, with the interviews and things have been wonderful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So, but I want to go back to you and the juggling. You get involved in things. How do you kind of juggle all of those pieces? From broadcasting to the clubs, to the financials, to your home life. What are some strategies that you use to kind of keep all of those things going?
This is not an area I've nailed. I've got to tell you. And so one thing, if you think about the things you need to work on, the feedback I get from people around me is there's not enough separation between me and my telephone. My mobile phone's always close by. And one of the consequences of working in my environment is it sort of goes 24/7. And so if there's an issue, the issue needs to be sorted out. It doesn't matter whether it's a Sunday afternoon or a Friday night or midweek. And so I don't have that luxury always. And even if I did, I probably don't have the personality that allows me to disconnect as much as I should. So I'll put my hand up straight away and say, I'm not going to say I'm the gold star on this one. I think there is some things though that I've learned along the way. There's the old thing of prioritization, working out quickly what's urgent and important. And I learned early on that the urgency isn't always, things aren't always as urgent as people may seem they are. And so often just my role often is just to settle people down a little bit and say, hey, I think this is one we can actually sleep on for a while. I think we don't need to react to this right now. I work in a very emotional environment. Things are always amazing or terrible.
Yeah.
And that's elite sport. If this doesn't happen today, we can't win tomorrow. And so a big part of my role is just sort of calming people down a little bit and saying, hey, I understand, but I don't think we need to solve this one right now, or certainly don't need to make that big decision today. That's certainly one of them. And so just having that, the feedback I get is I've sort of, I suppose, over time developed this calm demeanor where I can grab a lot of chaos, try and make order of it, and then work on a plan. Doesn't always mean to get it right, but that's just a skill I think I've developed having been in this environment. So that's a big part of it. I think this awareness that I will go to work on a particular day like we all do, and I'll have a series of things I want to achieve in that day. Often I don't get near any of them. And so just being well aware that my day-to-day isn't necessarily determined by the things that I want to do. And in fact, that I won't walk out at the end of the day putting a line through my to-do list of everything I want to get done. But I can show you, I do have every day, I have a to-do list of things I do. And so I think in my mind, if I keep a bit of an idea of all the things I can live with the fact that I'm not getting it all done, but I know what needs to be done. So I turn sort of chaos into some sort of order, try and work out the things that can't wait. This all sounds very common sense, I know, but when you overlay it with reality, and then I know that things are always going to be not quite 100% where you want them to be. So being okay with that is fairly important. Then there's a piece about, family and kids and all that sort of stuff, which you've just got to try and make time and work out where the priorities lie. And that's an area that, I think I'm still working on.
Yeah, aren't we all? Aren't we all? So the other thing I want to take a look at is, with the news, with COVID, and this player might have it and that player might not, there would be that overemphasis to just react, because the media can be unrelenting. Maybe that's a nice way to put it. They can probably be worse than that. So how do you kind of manage that? Do you have a strategy or a formula that you use with your team when you need to batten down the hatches?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I've got a lot of experience in dealing with a crisis, if you call it that. And our definition of a crisis is very different than the real world's definition of a crisis. So I just want to say that for a start, that there's people that have been doing a lot more important things than I do and dealing with a lot bigger issues than I do. But in our little world, little emotional world of sport and elite sport, you can find yourself in I'm very careful to say, in a crisis. So the best example, really recently on Sunday, I get a phone call sort of mid-morning Sunday to find out that one of the players from the Essendon Football Club has tested positive to COVID. On Saturday, so not Sunday, on Saturday, and tested positive to COVID. And given that's the circumstance, we need to make a decision about whether they play that next day. And that has all sorts of implications. And so
that's a massive one.
Yeah. And so I'm probably one of 3 or 4 people at that point who know that's happened. And so for me, then it's about really just slowing things down for a bit and working out, okay, we've got this situation. I don't want to rush off and do anything just a moment. I need to work out who are the stakeholders, what needs to be done, what decisions need to be made now, what good decisions we need to make right now, and what other things can wait, and whose help do I need to make those decisions. And so my experience tells me is, they say, if you got 2 hours to cut down a tree, spend the first hour and a half sharpening the axe, which is sort of that thing they talk about. It's like, just spend a bit of time, don't rush off and start ringing people and wind this thing up. Just spend a bit of time preparing and understanding what the situation is you're dealing with. Just get everyone just to take a bit of a breath and then put a plan in place and get the right people around you. And so, I spent that next 2 or 3 hours saying, okay, here's all the factors. Who are the key people? Let's start making some calls and some decisions. And so I think my experience has always been try and take the emotion out of something, because there's a bit of panic and a bit of emotion. It's going to be a big media story. The media are going to look for answers quicker than I've got them. And so I've just got to adopt the right process and not worry the fact that there's a media pack and my phone's ringing every 2 minutes with journalists who are starting to find this out. I've just got to keep that emotion out of it and say, okay, I'm going to make some really good decisions quickly here. And if I make a few good decisions with the right group of people, then we're on the right path. If you make a couple of bad decisions early on, it's really hard to correct that path with such scrutiny in our environment. And so I think it's just, as I say, we call that our definition of a crisis. I think the same principles would exist generally in or out of sport.
Yeah. Wow. And as far as the club moving forward, I know, I know that we've got the COVID situation, and that's going to continue on. And, right now Melbourne is having a bit of a flare up, and I'm sure flare ups will happen in New South Wales as well. That's what they've said from the beginning. How does that kind of play into your strategy, though, as far as how you kind of navigate your way forward? Does that really influence it? Or are you still on your plan and you just kind of go, well, we're just going to have to wait and adjust?
Yeah, well, this is a live question, isn't it? That the approach of this season, and it might teach us some things about how to approach things going forward, but it has just been literally to understand what all the scenarios are and plan for each of the scenarios and just deal with the current reality. So not spend all day worrying about what might happen. Surely you absolutely need to have plans for each scenario, but then we have realities and we've got to deal with those realities. And so trying to have part of my head living in the here and now and how do we best execute the plans we've got in front of us, but another part of my head and my staff thinking about all those things. So the best example is we've just created a hub in WA, Western Australia, where we'll send some Victorian teams over there to play in order to be able to get our season away. At the same time, we also need to think about scenarios where we may not be able to continue to play games in each state because that state, whether it's Victoria or a different state, changes its regulations. And so we've got these series of scenarios that are happening, and it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. It's sort of okay until you get to the end. You just got to make sure you got all the pieces. And so we're just trying to manage that day to day and really taking an approach where we talk about being flexible and nimble. And this whole thing that stuff's going to happen. And stuff's going to happen, and we need to move on quickly. And when it happens, just deal with it. Dust yourself off and go again. And that approach has worked for us so far. I don't think we've got any expectations about how this season is going to play out. We know how they're going to start. We don't know how we're going to finish. We've just got to deal with issues as they come. And it's actually not a bad approach. Generally, you think from a work point of view of get the here and now right. Plan for different scenarios, but if you live in the here and now, make good decisions, the rest of it will look after itself.
Yeah. Wow. Because again, in the media about the grand finals, maybe in Perth, like that's been in the news and everything else. So you could see the political stuff again from just as a punter, I could see all of this interesting things trying to permeate, and of course, media trying to make a story out of that as well. What do you do with your team when that happens? Do you tell them ignore it? Do you tell them, well, let's consider all the options? Do you have a strategy for things like that, or do you just kind of suck it and see?
No, I think what you do, I learned very early on, is you've got to make the right decisions. So there'll be a populist approach, whether that be the media or whatever else, but you have to make the right decision first and then deal with how you manage the media second. You can't make decisions based on media. And the other thing is that there's good footy talk, right? So if I'm living in a world where I did Fox Football last night, an interview with Fox Footy, and they're asking me about grand finals in WA or fixturing or team performance, that's really good footy talk. The stuff that we've got to develop strategies to get our way out of is things like, I say develop strategy, our focus is things like on racism, for example. And when we've got issues around players not being in an environment where they feel comfortable, they're the issues we've got to focus on, the issues that I say, okay, how do we develop policies and strategies and understand better our environment to deal with those things? All the other stuff is actually good footy talk. And I love the fact they're talking about where the grand final might be. I love the fact that we're having debates about who's got a good fixture and a bad fixture. That's what makes the world go around, our world go around anyway. And so I try and work out what's good football talk versus what are the things that are actually real issues in our game and issues that we need to turn our mind to.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Great strategy to use. What is relevant and what isn't. There was somebody that said years ago, there's no bad news is good news. Maybe that was Trump with his approach, always being in the news. But there is good news and hard news, I guess, as well. So for you, beyond this year, what are your thoughts about the AFL beyond 2020? Where do you think the game needs to go in the future?
Yeah, I think if you look at the immediate future, so you look at next year, there's this view of when things return to normal. I'm not sure what normal means. And in fact, there's some things we don't want to return to normal. And so we had 3 streams of work without that taking too long. We had a stream which was like, we just need to make some decisions to make sure financially we're sustainable. And unfortunately, that meant we had to reduce our workforce. The second one is we've got to stabilise and get back to playing. This third phase that we're starting to step into now is what's the future look like? How do we find some opportunity in what we're going through at the moment and do things differently? Doesn't mean we're going to be smaller or less, just different. And so what does that mean right from our game and the way we broadcast our game and the relationships we have there, right through to grassroots with boys and girls football? And you've got this burning platform where people will accept change much easier than they have before. And so I don't have a specific answer to you to say it's going to look like this and this and this. What I would say, though, is a large part of our organisation is really focused on what's the AFL 2.0 look like? What's the next version of us look like? And not just at the elite level, but all the way through.
Right. Wow. And it's interesting because Hands Across the Water is a charity, you know, and we support the kids in Thailand. We have 7 centres, over 350 kids in care. And we also a separate division called the Hands Group that run commercial activities. And normally the commercial activity is either rides in Thailand on the ground or it's actually running events. And our biggest event is called the Future of Leadership. So the top speakers across Australia, they donate their time to speak on stage, and then corporates send people to attend those conferences. And the team at Hands has had to really flip as well. And they're now running that online. So we're just about to launch that, coming up for July to go, all right, here's Future of Leadership, but it's all online, which is kind of what you're talking about. Sometimes you got to look for the new opportunity and innovate and get a little bit creative and kind of try and step into that space.
Yeah, I agree. And the default is always just to go back to where you were. You don't necessarily want to do that. You've got to resist that where you can.
Yeah. Well, Travis, thank you so much for your time. It's been enlightening. Especially again when I saw your name, I'm going, wait a minute, he's been in the news, he's been under fire, he's been juggling all of this, and he seems to kind of navigate a pretty straight ship, which is impressive giving all of that as well. But I just want to say thanks for donating your time to Hands to kind of share some of your insights and share some of your wisdom as well. And we look forward to getting you on a ride.
No, and thanks for having me. I mean, I've got incredible respect for you guys doing this. And as I said, a little bit of jealousy as well. I've done a couple of these sort of rides and it's an incredible experience, but it comes from the right place. And obviously you're the type of people that want to give back. And I think that's fantastic. So well done.
Thanks again, Travis. I'll hand it back to CT.
Cheers.
No worries. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Travis. Some really great advice in there for everybody on this session. I think just in business life, yeah. So thank you so much for sharing and coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Claire.
So, team, that wraps us up for Thursday. So that's another 25 kilometres done. Don't forget to log your kilometres. And if you want to catch up on, if you want to revisit the chat with Travis, we'll obviously have that available in our YouTube channel for you to revisit there. Now, in terms of coming up, so tomorrow morning, and this is really cool, we're going to be joined by a guy called Mickey Campbell. Now, if you think riding 800 kilometers over the whole month has been a little bit challenging, imagine riding it in 2 days. So Mickey's coming on to have a chat about his weekend ride. He's going to be doing the M7 in Sydney or in New South Wales, and he's going to ride the 800 kilometers over the weekend. So we are looking forward to having a chat with him. And then coming up on Saturday, we'll do some live crosses to the homes and get ready to celebrate as we ride into BTN next Tuesday. So there's a lot still coming. Keep up those kilometers, and thank you, Scotty. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.